In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the consequences of what he refers to as deep stupidity in foreign policy decisions made by the Biden administration. He highlights the significant impact that such decisions can have on the safety and security of the United States and its allies. Shapiro points out that while there are checks and balances in place to mitigate the effects of stupidity in domestic policy, the President of the United States has significant power over foreign policy decisions. This means that the incompetence of a president can put the lives of Americans and allies at risk. Shapiro criticizes President Joe Biden's foreign policy track record, describing him as an imbecile who lacks a solid understanding of foreign affairs. He references former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates' statement that Biden had not been right on a single foreign policy issue throughout his career. Shapiro discusses the escalating tensions in Ukraine, where Russia's aggression has put the region on the brink of war. He criticizes the Biden administration's approach, particularly Secretary of State Antony Blinken's call for Ukraine to join NATO. Shapiro argues that such a move could lead to a direct conflict with Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower. Shapiro also addresses the situation in the Middle East, specifically the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He criticizes the Biden administration for siding with Hamas and pressuring Israel to agree to a ceasefire without addressing the issue of hostages held by the terrorist group. He argues that this approach emboldens Hamas and undermines Israel's security. Shapiro warns that the Biden administration's stance on the Middle East conflict could embolden Iran, a major sponsor of terrorism in the region. He suggests that Iran may see an opportunity to escalate tensions and pose a greater threat to Israel and other American allies in the region. Shapiro also points out the support for Israel from other Middle Eastern countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, who are hoping for Hamas to be defeated as it is an Iranian proxy threatening regional stability. Shapiro expresses concern that the Biden administration's foreign policy decisions, particularly in Ukraine and the Middle East, could escalate tensions to the point of triggering a larger conflict. He highlights the risks of appeasing hostile actors like Russia, Hamas, and Iran, which could lead to a broader military confrontation. Shapiro further discusses the ineffectiveness of diversity, equity, and inclusion (DEI) programs, citing Charlemagne the God's criticism of such initiatives. He agrees with Charlemagne's assessment that DEI programs do not necessarily improve workplace conditions for minorities and can even have negative consequences. Shapiro emphasizes the importance of rationality and critical thinking in evaluating the effectiveness of such programs. Regarding Taiwan and China, Shapiro criticizes the Biden administration's stance on not supporting Taiwanese independence, despite de facto supporting it. He highlights the strategic importance of Taiwan and the need for the U.S. to demonstrate naval power to deter China from aggressive actions. Shapiro points out the inadequacy of the Coast Guard's current capabilities in the face of China's increasing assertiveness in the region. Shapiro also addresses former President Trump's comments on Israel's handling of the conflict with Hamas. Trump suggests that Israel should end the war quickly to avoid negative public perception, which Shapiro agrees with. He contrasts Trump's advice with Biden's pressure on Israel to declare a ceasefire, which he views as detrimental to Israel's security and interests. In discussing the media's portrayal of Trump's comments on Israel, Shapiro criticizes the bias in labeling Trump as anti-Israel for his remarks. He argues that Trump's advice for Israel to act swiftly and decisively in the conflict is not anti-Israel, but rather practical and strategic. Lastly, Shapiro touches on Trump's remarks about Biden potentially being under the influence of drugs during debates and speeches. While acknowledging the humor in Trump's comments, Shapiro emphasizes the importance of focusing on Biden's policy decisions and actions rather than personal attacks.